Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the studies. In the previous class, we were studying about various factors which became reason for the effectivity of the Indian Constitution. In this regard, we were considering the point which was inheritance from the national movement. And in this regard, what we understood that the basis of the constitution which was drafted by the Constituent Assembly members in the time frame of around 3 years, actually that constitution was based on the ideologies and principles which were evolved during national movement. And in this regard, we were considering the objective resolution which was presented by Pandit Nehru in the Constituent Assembly on 13th of December 1946. And now we will proceed further as this point was clear to you. Now we will see that how our constitution makers were aware that uh, there must not be concentration of power at one place. Power must be divided among various organs and institutions of the government, and not only this, but power should be divided among different levels of the government. And in this regard, our constitution makers what adopted was the parliamentary form of government and federalism. Parliamentary form of government and federalism was important. It was important to adopt this kind of institutional arrangement so that power should not be abused by the government. If the power is abused by the government, then in that case, who will be the victim? The victim will be the common people. So, in order to avoid that kind of abusement by the government, our constitution makers made a constitutional arrangement under which parliamentary form of government and federal arrangement were adopted. And this under this parliamentary form of government, what happens that executive under the leadership of prime minister with his cabinet members and with his council of ministers, they are responsible. They are collectively responsible to the lower house of the parliament. This is parliamentary form of government in which under which the prime minister and other council of ministers members are the member of the lower house, lower or upper any house of the parliament also, and they are collectively responsible towards the lower house of the parliament. And then federal arrangement was adopted under which powers of the government was divided among between the center and state government. So in this way, our constitution makers tried to uh, arrange the institution in a reasonable manner. Now, what we find is that uh, when our constitution makers were making the constitution, by that time there were many constitution which not only which were not only existing, but they were in practice for a long time. And so our constitution makers took benefit of this situation, and what they did, they gained benefit from the experience of other countries. Here, what you we should try to understand that in front of the constituent in front of the members of the Constituent Assembly, the task was to uh, make a constitution, but they were not supposed to make a unique constitution. What was important for the country, for the benefit of the country, that they should present a constitution which is working, which is practically efficient. Constitution was to be made by the constitution makers, and in this regard they took advantage from the experiences of other countries, and in this process what they did, they studied the constitution of many countries, such as the constitution of America, the constitution of Canada, Ireland, and of course Britain. Though Britain is not having any written constitution, still there are many provisions which are there are many loose set of rules which are working there, and our constitution makers studied all these constitutions, and what they did, they borrowed some of the provisions of these constitutions into our constitution. But here one more thing you have to understand, that our constitution makers did not simply borrowed any of the provisions from any of the countries, but actually what they borrowed the provisions, uh, those provisions which they thought that this will be more suitable for the circumstances which was prevailing in our country, for the need of our country, and they also made some changes in the provisions, then they adopted that provision. And as Indian constitution has borrowed many provisions from many countries, that's why many times it is called a bag of borrowing. Though it is it can be said that it is a bag of borrowing, because we have borrowed so many provisions from many constitution, but still it's not like that we borrowed blindly. Our constitution makers were very much aware of the problems. They were very much aware of the circumstances and need of the Indian people, and keeping all these things in mind, they borrowed the provision. They made some changes according to the need of the people, according to the circumstances of the country, and then they adopted the provision. So we cannot say that it is simply a bag of borrowing. Then now we will see some of the provisions which were adopted from important constitutions. For example, we can see here India has adopted, India has borrowed many provisions from British Constitution. Here you can see the first thing which we borrowed from uh, the first thing which we borrowed from from British Constitution was first past the post system. This system is regarding the electoral politics, and it will be explained to you in the following chapter. So here I am not going to explain it. It will be explained later. Then India borrowed parliamentary form of government from the British Constitution. I have just told you what is parliamentary form of government. Then India also borrowed the idea of the rule of law. Rule of law is it means that everyone is equal in front of law. The law will not discriminate people on the basis of their educational or economic status, on the basis of their caste, class, or gender, or anything like that. Rule is equal for all the people, and the no, law is ruling the country. No person, not a single person, not a group of people are ruling the country, but actually law is ruling the country. Law is the supreme. This is rule of law. Then the institution of the speaker and her or his role has also been borrowed from the Constitution of Britain. In Britain, there is House of Commons, and in our country, we borrowed that House of Commons from British Constitution, and that is known as Lok Sabha. And the head of the Lok Sabha is called Speaker, and this the process of his election and his powers and functions all are borrowed from the Constitution of Britain. Then the law making procedure, which was adopted by Indian Constitution, is also has also been borrowed from the British Constitution. Then we come to the Constitution of United States of America. Here also we find that in our Constitution there is a list of fundamental rights. This fundamental right has the concept of this fundamental right. Various types of rights which are enlisted there in the Constitution are also borrowed from the Charter of Fundamental Rights under United States Constitution. Then the power of judicial review and independence of the judiciary. This is also borrowed from American Constitution. Um, you must be aware of these terms, what is judicial review and what is independence of judiciary, as these are the topics which you are studying from class 8th. uh, this will be explained in the following chapters in detail. Then you will these things will become very much familiar to you for all the time. Now we see that from the Constitution of Ireland, our constitution makers adopted directive principles of state policy. These are directive principles of state policy. It means कि state will make policies. Uh, State will make policies keeping in mind these principles. These principles are giving direction to the policy of the state, and the main purpose of this directive principle of state policy is to construct a socially justiciable society. Now we come to French Constitution. From French Constitution, we adopted the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, uh, which found its place in the preamble itself of our Constitution. Then we come to Canadian Constitution. From the Canadian Constitution, our Constitution makers adopted quasi-federal form of government. It means कि our federalism is tilted towards the center. In our federalism, our constitution makers intentionally made the center more powerful than the state. It was their opinion, and in this regard, they followed the Canadian constitution. And then the idea of residual power was also borrowed from Canadian constitution, as residual powers are those powers there is division of power between the center and the state. The central government or the central legislature, that is parliament, is restricted to make laws only on the subjects which are in the union list, and the state government is restricted to make laws on the subjects which are in the state list. Then there is concurrent list. On concurrent list, both the government have the power to make laws, but if there is any kind of conflict in the laws, then the law which was made by the center will prevail. Okay. And now comes the residual power. The residual powers are such subjects which are not included, which are neither included in union list, nor in state list, nor in concurrent list. These are residuary powers, because there are many subjects which arose with the passage of time, and these residuary subjects were also being given to the center. So this concept, this provision was also borrowed from Canadian Constitution. So in this way, we see that our Constitution makers borrowed many things from many Constitution, but still we can't say that they blindly borrowed everything. They made everything according to the situations of India, according to the needs of the people. And in this way, they were able to present one of the most successful constitution in the world, because we in this constitution is working for the last 70 years, and it is called a living document. It is not just a piece of paper, a set of rules written on the a piece of paper, but actually it's a living thing, because it is evolving with the time, and in this way it has made it has made itself effective and successful. So now your chapter is complete. Now you can see that there are many cartoons are there in your chapter. So in the next class we will discuss those cartoons which are given in your first chapter. So we will meet in the next class. Okay.